Can you believe it? They thought he was just a janitor, old, limping, invisible to the world rushing by. But oh, how wrong they were. Every Sunday, without fail, picture this, Raymond Navarro, a man weathered by time, climbed into his rusty pickup and drove out to a forgotten cemetery, his heart pulling him to the same lonely grave. No family waited for him there, no flag waved proudly in the breeze, just 6 quiet, trembling words whispered into the wind, "You're not forgotten. Not this week." Can you feel the weight of that promise? Then, one fateful morning, he didn't come home. Can you imagine the silence that fell over that little trailer off Route 6? And when the Pentagon, yes, the Pentagon, cracked open the envelope tucked in his coat, what they uncovered shook Arlington to its very core. Who was this man, really? Welcome to Heartfelt Gratitude Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness weave their way into our souls. Let's dive in and uncover what really happened, because this story, it's going to stay with you. Picture the scene, just after sunrise, the first golden rays piercing through a thick, rolling fog. There he was, Raymond Navarro, lying still at the base of an old, weathered grave in Elmwood Cemetery. One hand clutched crushed wildflowers, marigolds, maybe, or daisies he'd plucked from the roadside, their fragile petals spilling through his fingers. The other hand pressed gently against the faded stone, as if it meant everything to him, as if it was the last thing that mattered in this world. Who could he have been reaching for in that final moment? Raymond was 72, a janitor at Hillside Regional High, a quiet soul who never married, never had kids. He lived alone in that small trailer, paid his bills on time like clockwork, and picked up extra shifts when the younger staff bailed. No one knew much else about him. Did they ever stop to wonder? That morning, the sun finally broke through, casting a pale, almost holy light across his still body. His coat was soaked from the damp grass, clinging to him like a shroud. His hat, an old navy ball cap he wore every day, had blown a few feet away, tangled in the brambles like it was trying to escape. His face, though, peaceful, not frozen in pain, just done, like he'd finally laid down a burden he'd carried too long. Officer Thomas Baylor was the first to stumble upon him. Can you picture it? Thomas crouching beside this old man, his trained eyes scanning the scene, no blood, no struggle, just a man who'd let go. But then, wait, something caught his eye, an envelope, worn and yellowed, its edges curled from years of being carried close. It peeked out from Raymond's coat pocket, and Thomas hesitated. What could it be? Carefully, he pulled it free. No address, no name, just 6 shaky words scrawled in block letters, to be company, 3rd Battalion. What on earth did that mean? The envelope was empty, but tucked behind it, folded 3 times, sealed with brittle, cracking tape, was a folder. On the cover, in faded ink, a chilling instruction, to be opened only in the event of death. Thomas stood up slowly, his breath catching. What had he just stumbled into? The headstone beside Raymond was a relic, cracked, half swallowed by weeds, the name barely legible under layers of lichen and years of acid rain, Lieutenant J.M. Moore, USMC, Kia 1968. A name Thomas didn't know, but oh, how it sent a shiver down his spine, something deeper than the crisp October wind. Raymond Navarro hadn't just died here. He'd finished something, hadn't he? The call to the Pentagon came later, a routine move per department policy. A veteran passes under odd circumstances, a sealed folder marked for military eyes, a unit named, you pick up the phone. The woman on the other end was calm at first, all business. But when Thomas read those words, to be company, 3rd Battalion, she went dead silent. Repeat the coordinates of the grave, she demanded, her voice tight. Thomas did. Stay where you are, she snapped. Someone's coming. Click. And just like that, the line went cold. Thomas stood alone in that cemetery, the autumn wind curling around him like ghostly fingers. The graveyard was eerily quiet, only the distant hum of highway traffic and the occasional flutter of a crow's wings broke the stillness. He glanced down at Raymond again. A janitor, just a janitor, or so they'd thought. But now the Department of Defense was on high alert. What secret had this quiet man taken to his grave? Raymond Navarro wasn't the kind of guy you noticed unless you had to. Every morning, he shuffled through the echoing halls of Hillside Regional, pushing his mop with a steady rhythm. He scrubbed cafeteria floors before the first bell, swapped out flickering light bulbs, patched up leaky faucets, wiped graffiti off lockers before the kids could snicker. Most students didn't even know his name, can you believe that? Teachers called him Ray or Sir if they were in a generous mood. The vice principal once cornered him, all concerned, asking if he was medically cleared to keep working, something about safety risks with that limp of his. Raymond just nodded, kept scrubbing the windows. That limp, though, just slight enough to make folks squirm, was always there, a quiet reminder of something unspoken. His khaki uniform was pristine, tucked in with military precision, wireframe glasses perched on his nose, that same blue ball cap pulled low every day. Always polite, always quiet, did anyone ever ask him who he really was? But every Sunday, every single Sunday, while Millvale, New Hampshire, slept off church sermons or football hangovers, Raymond made his pilgrimage. 15 miles out toward Route 19, past the old truck stop with its flickering neon sign, up the gravel path behind the lumberyard, to a cemetery no one cared about anymore. Elmwood Cemetery was a ghost of itself, decommissioned, grass knee-high, fences sagging like tired old bones, half the names faded into oblivion. No one visited, not a soul. Except Raymond Navarro, every Sunday, no exceptions. He'd park by the rusted gate, lock his car with a careful click, and carry a small bouquet, wild marigolds when he could find them, dandelions or daisies when he couldn't. He never told a soul where he was going. No selfies, no social media posts, just one man, one grave, Lieutenant J. Moore. Why? What pulled him back week after week? He'd clear the moss with tender hands, wipe dirt off with his sleeve, yank up vines like they'd personally offended him. And then, every time, he'd lean in close and whisper those 6 sacred words, "You're not forgotten." Not this week. That was it, no grand speeches, no tears. Then he'd sit there on the grass, sometimes scribbling in a worn leather notebook, sometimes just staring at the trees as they swayed in the breeze, like old soldiers reminiscing about battles long past. What was going through his mind? Here's the kicker, Raymond had never met Lieutenant Moore. Not a brother, not a cousin, not even in the same unit. He'd stumbled across the grave by accident years ago, looking for his cousin's plot. The name, the silence, the absence of any flag or flower, it gnawed at him. A Marine, dead in 1968, no family, no visits, no one left to care. So Raymond decided, can you imagine the resolve, if no one else would remember, he would. One Sunday turned into 2, then every week, through snowstorms, through fevers, even after that mild stroke that slowed him down, even when the VA stopped picking up his calls. Every single Sunday. He never explained why. Did he even need to? Some debts aren't scribbled in ledgers, they're etched in silence, in loyalty, in the belief that a grave left alone is a promise shattered. Back in his cruiser, Thomas Baylor stared at the field report, Raymond Navarro, janitor, deceased, unclaimed veteran folder initiated, possible classified content, awaiting federal response. That last line hit him like a punch, subject identified as recipient of multiple combat citations, unregistered. Unregistered? How could that be? Thomas leaned back, eyes drifting to the cemetery fence. Somewhere, way above his pay grade, someone had just bolted upright at a desk. And for the first time in decades, the name James M. Moore rang through the Pentagon's hallowed halls, not as a faded statistic, but as a Marine remembered, all because one stubborn old man refused to let him fade. They buried Raymond later, and oh, what a quiet affair it was. No family stepped forward, no next of kin claimed him. The town scraped together funds for a simple service, closed casket, a military flag draped over the wood, a borrowed bugler playing taps through a tinny Bluetooth speaker because the real brass section was booked. Thomas stood in the back row, hands stuffed in his pockets. Why was he even there? He'd barely known Raymond, just a nod here or there near the school. But since that morning at the cemetery, something had shifted inside him, like a rusty gear grinding back to life, like Raymond's silence had pried open a door to something ancient. That envelope stayed with him, to be company, 3rd Battalion, and he turned it over in his coat pocket as the pastor mumbled a few quick words under a gray October sky. The wind was cold, steady, purposeful. He watched the casket lower, no rifle salute, no folded flag for a widow, just the squeak of ropes and the dull thud of earth waiting to swallow him whole. And then, can you believe it, it all began with a single photograph. Maggie Wright, a jogger, had passed through Elmwood earlier, her run cut short by a pulled tendon. She stopped to stretch by the rusted gates and saw him, an old man kneeling in the grass, one hand on a weathered headstone, the other clutching wild marigolds like they were his lifeline. She didn't snap the picture to mock him, she felt something real. The man visits same forgotten grave every Sunday, no flag, no fanfare, she wrote on her blog. Her caption: maybe some heroes don't need medals, just a place to remember. 3 views when she hit the hay, 40,000 by dawn. Can you imagine the ripple? After the burial, Thomas sat in his cruiser, scrolling his phone when, ping, an email, subject, urgent request from DOD. Official, stamped, no nonsense. They wanted the grave's coordinates again, headstone details, Raymond's last known words, everything. They demanded the coroner's notes, the police report, even Maggie's name. And then, was the envelope intact? Thomas's pulse jumped. He hadn't mentioned the folder yet, the one sealed with red wax, edges soft from years of handling, labeled to be opened only in the event of death. He hadn't dared crack it open. But now, with the Fed's green light, he did. Inside, a file that didn't fit the Raymond they knew, Navarro, Raymond Elias, enlistment USMC 1969, deployment mask boss 1971, top secret clearance, service record redacted. Medals, 2 bronze stars, 1 silver star, commendations from names he didn't recognize, missing since '74, last assignment a mystery. But the last page? A handwritten note, simple, raw, I didn't save him, but I never forgot him. No signature, just truth. That night, Thomas sat on his bed, the file open like a holy text. How could this be the same man who mopped their hulls? Raymond had been a ghost, background noise in a town too busy to care. But now he was on a federal watch list, flagged as a Tier 1 deceased veteran. Now the whole country was waking up to a man who'd spent decades keeping another's memory alive. Next morning, Thomas drove back to Elmwood. The gate groaned, fog hugged the ground, and there it was, Lieutenant James M. Moore, USMC, Kia 1968. Flowers, dozens, wild and fresh, ringed the stone like guardians. Someone had scrubbed it clean, recarved the letters, planted a tiny American flag. And beneath Moore's name, chiseled fresh, not forgotten. Not this week. Thomas knelt, stunned. Moore had been a first lieutenant, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Tet Offensive, his unit ambushed near Laos. One survivor crawled out, Raymond Navarro, head wound, shattered arm, no memory of his escape. Officially, Moore's body was lost, the mission sealed. But Raymond didn't need a report, he knew. He carried it as duty, not guilt, showing up every Sunday not for peace, but for honor. Can you believe it? One day, Officer Thomas Baylor's phone rang, and it wasn't just any call, it was from an aide to a 4-star general. Imagine that. The voice on the line was hushed, almost trembling with reverence. Are you familiar with Raymond Navarro? They asked. Thomas, still shaken from everything that had unfolded, managed a quiet, yes. Then came the bombshell, there's going to be a review. The secretaries asked for a briefing. A briefing? On what? On a humble janitor from Millvale? Oh, but it wasn't just any briefing, it was about Lieutenant Moore's honor and the incredible man who'd kept his memory alive for longer than anyone could fathom. Please keep the grave secure, the aide urged, voice tight with urgency. There's a team inbound. Thomas hung up, staring at the now silent phone, his heart pounding. Who was Raymond Navarro, really? How could one quiet soul's devotion echo all the way to the Pentagon? By the time the convoy rolled into Millvale, the little town was buzzing, absolutely electric with whispers. Black SUVs glided past the gas station like shadows, Marines in crisp dress blues stood tall near the courthouse, and a federal sedan loomed outside the funeral home. Something massive was brewing, and everyone could feel it. Thomas stood on his porch, his coffee gone cold in his trembling hand, watching this slow, silent parade snake up Main Street. This wasn't for a politician or a big-shot celebrity, no, this was for a janitor. A man who'd mopped floors and fixed broken pipes. Can you imagine? But oh, the truth was about to hit like a thunderclap. As dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, 2 Marines appeared at Raymond Navarro's modest trailer. No flashing cameras, no blaring headlines, just 2 figures stepping out of the twilight. One was tall, clean-shaven, with eyes as steady as granite, the other, older, bore a scar slicing through his left eyebrow, a mark of battles fought and survived. They knocked twice, sharp and deliberate. Thomas, still in his uniform, opened the door, his voice soft but steady. I've been keeping it locked up, he said, a faint quiver in his tone. Didn't want anyone poking around his things. The older officer nodded, his face etched with gratitude. Thank you, Officer Baylor. May we come in? They stepped inside, their boots barely making a sound, as if they were entering a holy place. On the table sat a weathered folder, and beside it, a treasure Thomas had uncovered, a black and white photograph of 6 Marines, drenched to the bone, grinning like they'd just outrun fate itself. There was more, right in the center, his hand resting on Navarro's shoulder, that crooked grin lighting up the frame. The tall Marine picked it up, cradling it like it might crumble to dust. We saw the post, he murmured, voice thick with awe, the one of Raymond at the grave. Thomas nodded, his throat tight. Someone recognized the name. The scarred Marine slid a document across the table, the Department of Defense insignia gleaming like a beacon. Thomas's breath hitched as he read, ceremonial reinstatement, honor guard assignment, posthumous. And below it, words that stopped his heart, custodian of record, Lieutenant James M. Moore, USMC, recognized Mr. Raymond E. Navarro. He looked up, eyes wide. You're making it official. The scarred Marine's nod was solemn, his voice low and firm. Navarro didn't just remember Moore, he carried him. Before the first light of dawn kissed Hillcrest National Cemetery, the place was alive, bursting with purpose. Marines in dress blues lined the ridge, rifles at the ready, boots gleaming like black mirrors in the faint glow. Thomas stood at the back, his heart hammering in his chest. Who would show up for a janitor's ceremony? But as the sun peeked over the horizon, painting the sky gold, the road filled with people, slowly at first, then like a flood of love and respect. Teachers clutching lesson plans, students from Hillside High wide-eyed with wonder, veterans in faded caps and gleaming prosthetics, church ladies with signs painted in bright colors, even ROTC kids standing tall against the chilly wind. And there, near the front, a boy, no more than 10, clutched a worn, folded letter like it was his lifeline. Thomas watched, mesmerized, as a colonel knelt to meet him, accepting the note with a gentle hand. The boy whispered something, then followed the colonel to a white tent where Raymond's photo stood proud on a black easel. With trembling fingers, he laid a single dandelion at its base, then turned to Moore's headstone, James M. Moore, 1st Lieutenant, USMC, 1944 to 1968, never forgotten. And beneath it, freshly carved in stone, and to the man who never forgot him. Thomas blinked back tears he didn't even know he had in him. This wasn't just a funeral, it was a nation waking up to a truth it had almost let slip away. Bagpipes wailed a mournful tune, boots crunched against gravel, and 3 volleys split the air like lightning. A riderless horse passed by, its black coat shimmering, empty boots swaying in the stirrups, a sight that could break even the hardest heart. But what truly shattered Thomas was a small, wax-sealed envelope, pulled from Raymond's belongings and placed tenderly on Moore's grave. Scrawled across it in faded ink, "You're not forgotten. Not this week." A young corporal stepped forward, her voice shaking as she read, "Raymond Elias Navarro served as an unofficial custodian of record for Lieutenant James Moore without compensation, without request. His consistent acts of remembrance fulfill criteria outlined in Title 10, Section 772 regarding continued military honors." She paused, her eyes glistening. In short, he did what no one asked him to do for a decade, and that was enough. Then came the boy's letter. Escorted by his mother, he handed it over, his small voice steady. "It's from my dad," he said. The officer unfolded it, reading aloud, "My father served with Moore. He had PTSD for years, wouldn't talk, wouldn't sleep. But then he saw a photo of an old man kneeling in the mud beside a forgotten grave. And he cried, and spoke Moore's name for the first time in years." The officer's voice broke. He said, "That man's the reason I'm still here, the one who kept watch when the rest of the world forgot." The crowd stood hushed, the wind itself seeming to pause in reverence. "We called him the watchman," the letter ended. The general stepped forward, cap in hand, and saluted the grave with a voice rough with emotion, "We speak their names, or they disappear." And someone kept speaking. Later, as the sun climbed higher and the crowd thinned, Thomas wandered back to the easel alone. The wind whispered through the trees, the light danced on the grass, and the silence wrapped around him like a blanket. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Raymond's notebook, page after page of letters, each one signed, "Your friend, still standing." He laid it on the grave with a trembling hand, then stepped back and saluted, not as a cop, but as a man forever altered by what he'd witnessed. But oh, the story didn't stop there. At Millvale High School, the principal, who'd once brushed off the limping janitor with a scoff, stood beside a towering photo of Raymond, mop in hand, head bowed in quiet dignity. A banner fluttered above, "Raymond Navarro, Honor Assembly, Service Through Silence." The students sat spellbound, not fidgeting, not distracted, just listening. They didn't know Raymond, didn't grow up with his story, but now they couldn't look away. A junior named Ethan Marks stepped up, clutching wild marigolds, his voice cracking with emotion. "I didn't know Mr. Navarro," he said. "I didn't even know there was a graveyard out on Route 19. But I read every letter he wrote, they're online now, on a website." He pointed to the screen, where Raymond's shaky handwriting glowed, "The watch ends, but the memory stands." Ethan's eyes shone with tears. "So I started going every Sunday, not just me, a whole group of us. We bring flowers, we read names, we sit, not because we knew them, but because we owe them everything." His voice dropped to a whisper. Mr. Navarro didn't just watch over a grave, he watched over a generation that forgot how to care. Raymond's legacy grew wings. At West Point, they taught the Navarro standard, duty beyond orders, kept in silence, a lesson etched in every cadet's heart. Moore's grave now bore 2 names, a testament in stone, and every Sunday, flowers arrived, laid by children's tiny hands, trembling old Marines, and strangers who'd never seen Millvale's dusty streets. Thomas visited often, in jeans and a jacket, whispering those 6 sacred words, "You're not forgotten. Not this week." One crisp spring morning, Naval Academy cadets arrived at Hillcrest, among them 2nd Lieutenant Carol Lane, sharp, steady, a former foster kid blazing a trail. She stood before the grave, her voice clear and strong. "Lieutenant Moore, we don't know your voice, but we feel your echo." And Mr. Navarro, he didn't just guard a grave, he guarded a memory the world was too busy to hold. She pinned her insignia to the stone, saluted, and stepped back, her eyes fierce with pride. Back in Millvale, Thomas unlocked Raymond's trailer one rainy afternoon. Everything was as it had been, coffee tin on the counter, uniform jacket on the chair, wire glasses on the windowsill. He opened the notebook to the last page. The watch ends, but the memory stands. Tears stung his eyes as he closed it gently, gazing out at the rain-streaked window. The wind sighed through the trees, carrying a promise: someone was still listening. Raymond Navarro's story cuts me deep, a humble janitor who honored a fallen Marine with quiet, stubborn devotion. It's a raw, beautiful slap in the face to how I live, how we all live. I'm gutted by the simplicity of it. No grand gestures, no spotlight, just a man showing up every Sunday, whispering to a grave, "You're not forgotten." In a world where I'm chasing likes, scrolling for validation, Raymond's life screams a truth I can't ignore: real purpose doesn't need a megaphone. It's not about being seen, it's about being felt. And God, does his story make me feel small, yet achingly inspired. Then there's the sting of what it says about us. We plaster, support our troops everywhere, but how many veterans' graves are gathering dust? Raymond didn't just remember, he acted, limping through rain and pain to keep a memory alive. It's a heartbreaking wake-up call: we're failing the ones we claim to honor. His story isn't just sweet, it's a damn indictment. One man's loyalty outshone a nation's half-hearted parades. When the Pentagon finally noticed, it wasn't victory, it was shame dressed up as recognition. I can't shake this. Raymond wasn't loud, wasn't rich, wasn't anything but relentless. And that's what gets me. In his shadow, I see every quiet sacrifice I've overlooked, every chance I've missed to show up when no one's watching. He didn't need fame, he needed meaning. Me. I'm haunted by how much I've chased the wrong thing. Raymond Navarro didn't just honor a Marine, he honored what it means to live with soul. And I'm left wondering if I'll ever measure up. In our darkest moments, kindness shines through, quiet and unassuming. Not every hero craves the spotlight, some just make sure no one's forgotten. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything. Subscribe to Heartfelt Gratitude Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is cherished, and quiet heroism lives forever.